Welcome to Narcissism Unmasked. Today, we are going to be talking about a really terrifying topic, stalking. That's really a very intrusive form of abuse, and it starts with really subtle signs that are really easy to dismiss. So in this conversation today, we're going to start talking about what it actually looks like. We're going to talk about why abusers do it and how to stay safe. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Narcissism Unmasked. And today I have an amazing guest with me, Katherine Kleis. So I want to ask you to just kind of introduce yourself. Tell us who you are.
Yeah. So like Lisa said, I'm Katherine Kleis, and my story starts as the daughter of a narcissist father, just growing up in that abusive, disadvantaged childhood home, which kind of led me into an exploration in the field of psychology and self-awareness. Well, before that, it led me down a path of traumatic relationships and kind of dating people that were undeserving of my time and emotionally abusive themselves. So eventually, seeing that pattern of how my childhood led me into my dating pattern, I found some self-awareness and dove deep into psychology, and then later made this my work. And my passion in kind of helping people find their own self-awareness and empowerment to kind of just break these cycles and break these patterns and start choosing more.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. You know, I am not the daughter of a narcissist, but I also found myself in all these toxic relationships. And I found myself not being able to get myself out, not really even recognize what was happening, because there's so many myths about domestic violence, about the victims of domestic violence, what it actually looks like. And today we're focusing on kind of a scary topic of stalking. And I want to go into some detail on maybe some more unrecognized things, some misunderstood things about stalking. I think people don't really realize how dangerous it can be. And I remember thinking in my own situation, like, he's not stalking me. But the truth is, he was absolutely stalking me. And in hindsight, it's so clear, but I didn't see it. So I want to kind of ask you, like, what do you think are some common things that an abuser might display when they are stalking in person? What does that actually look like?
Well, it could look like just showing up, being around, showing up to your work, showing up to your house, leaving you a lot of messages, reaching out to your loved ones, leaving flowers at your door, notes, gifts, right? Like these things that we kind of confuse as caring. Oh my gosh, they miss me, especially when you're codependent and have abandonment stuff. And you're like, oh, this is kind of sweet that they're still thinking about me and showing up to all these places. But really, it's an invasion. Like, I ended it. I asked you to stay away.
But that's the key, right? You ask them to stay away, but they're not staying away, but they're showing you these acts of love and giving you flowers or making you feel really cared about. I know I mistaked control as insecurity sometimes. And this is a good example of, like, he's just checking up on you because he loves you. He's just checking up on you because he's insecure. Meanwhile, he's following you around. Or mine would make comments about, like, I know you were at whatever location. And I'm like, how? We're not even together. How could you know that? And to this day, I have no idea in many circumstances how he knew where I was. What do you think are some of the main differences between in-person stalking and tech-based stalking? I think we're going to talk a lot more about the sort of in-person, but people can be stalked online too. What does that look like?
Yeah, being stalked online could just look like constantly looking at your social medias, your pictures, your stories, your friends. Who are you friends with? Who are your new friends? So some people will like literally know, oh, you have 602 friends on Facebook. And then the next day they look at your profile and you have 603, and they'll go through every single one to see if it was a new person. And is that person of the opposite sex or the sex that you date, right? And so it could look like reaching out to other people on social media, your friends, to check up on you or keep tabs on you, your location, if you have it on Snap Maps, or they still have it on Share My iPhone, whatever. So there's different ways to keep track of who you are. I would say another one is when you block them and they get a new number. Get a new number, use a block number, use a restricted number. So that would be some digital stalking.
Yeah. And you see that a lot. I've also seen, and it's funny, but it's almost funny at the lengths someone will go through to get in touch. I hear people say all the time, like, he sent me $1 on Venmo, or mine reached out to me on LinkedIn. Like, what the? You're trying to get space and they're coming at you. But again, it can come across like care or concern or insecurity. Like, I just want to know if it's guys that you're adding, and you don't need to know who's on my social media, but it's
Yes.
suffocating.
And creating fake profiles to watch you when you've blocked them and adding you.
Now, do you have personal experience with being stalked? Did you experience that in your relationship?
Twice. Well, I've been stalked a couple more than that, but through abusive relationships, I've had two abusers stalk me. And I will say that the first one was a more domestic violence type situation relationship, and he had me more scared. But there was also a lot of control in that I was younger and afraid that I was going to ruin his life if I sent him to jail or if I called the police, right? There was like that extra layer of, I just want to like end this as simply and quietly as I can without ruining his life. Like my actions would be what ruined his life, right?
That's so sad to see. And you see that so commonly, that we're worried about if he hits me and he goes to jail, like that's my fault. Meanwhile, he made the choice. He made the choice to stalk. That's not harassment, stalking, not legal things. And yet choices that they make, and we're worried about that. It's a wild feeling. I wish that, I could snap my fingers and help us all recognize that holding them accountable is so, so important. How do you think this kind of creates this like hyper vigilant feeling? How did you feel, and even your client, what have you seen when people are being stalked? What does that look like and feel like in your body and your own actions?
Well, I would say with the first one, just in my personal experience, I was very hypervigilant moving on because he kept stalking me and breaking and entering through me, entering new relationships and moving on and trying to like really intimidate the new boyfriend, which worked sometimes to stay away from me. So it created this trauma around, where is he going to be? The second relationship was more emotionally abusive. And that led me to a lot of hypervigilance just with my cell phone, because he reached out to me for probably 6 months after going no contact. And eventually I did block him. That took a while to just block him. But when your phone vibrates, is it going to be him? Is it going to be him? And then finally blocking him and having other friends come to me and say like, oh, he sent me this message and he's checking up on you. I've noticed that theme similar in my clients, in that we've had to almost like change their ringtone, because when their phone goes off, they go into a state of panic and they can feel it in their body. And sometimes that doesn't work, changing the number, right? Because we've said we blocked them and they're calling on restricted numbers. It's just,
people have a lot of ideas though about like what you can do to get them away, right? Call the police, block them. My God. And it's like, oh my gosh, I wish those things worked. I wish that was enough.
Yeah,
still should do those things. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they're completely futile. You have to start somewhere, but it's like, that's not going to be the thing that necessarily makes this person stop. I think what complicates it too is for victims that are stuck in a trauma bond, how they actually react maybe differently to being stalked. And for me, I think it helped me feel, I don't think the word is flattered, but just not afraid of the stalking. It was like, he feels like he's losing the relationship. And so he's responding in this way. And it's like, no, he's losing the control.
Well, and that really is the hard part when you're stuck in the trauma bond. The stalking feels like you're not being abandoned, right? Like if they were to just, then you're completely abandoned. You're almost like, well, why aren't you stalking me? Because we're so sick and not like you're mentally unwell, but like this has been a brainwashing situation. And so it does add a very, very confusing layer to stalking, where you're like, I know I shouldn't like this. Everyone wants me to call the police, but I'm worried he'll stop. Like, don't you love me? Why aren't you still reaching out? But I agree with you. You have to start doing your due diligence and getting your receipts, right? Like getting the restraining order, calling the police, all of this. So like you can eventually protect yourself. You can't do it without building up your case first, though. You have to have the case of stalking before anyone will listen to you.
Yeah. These are the things that we have to address, I think, early. And getting it early is so unbelievably important when you're being stalked, when you start to notice those first signs. And I know for me, it was like telling me that he knew my location. I remember he was seen on the driveway once, just kind of lurking at like 7 a.m. He was spotted by neighbors who kind of knew enough about my situation that they flagged that with me. That was so concerning. To me, I'm like, but he still cares. And I mean, maybe he's struggling to let go of the relationship. And it's like, he's on your driveway at 7 a.m. That's not normal. And for me, especially because he's not even awake at that time. So to me, I'm like, he didn't even go to sleep. He
Oh
was
my God.
drunk probably on the driveway at that time. I should have been much more scared.
Yeah, I agree. I think we minimize it because I had a situation too where neighbors like, oh yeah, he's been driving by. And I was out one day, I think exercising, coming up my block with my friend, and he drove by again. And it was my friend's reaction that kind of got me to be like, oh, okay. Because I was like, that's my ex. And he was like, that's scary. I was like, oh, is it? Like, I'm just used to it. Like, there he is again, checking up on me. Yeah, I haven't talked to him in 5 months, but
there he is. But that's actually the normalization of abuse and of that bad and scary behavior. And you get conditioned over the relationship to start associating some of that abusiveness and pain with love. So him driving by is like, he's still thinking about me, but like, you should be scared, girl. You should be so scared right now, but we aren't. Having said that, there are lots of people that I talk to that absolutely are terrified, and they're afraid because if you change your number and he doesn't have access to you via the phone, now he's going to show up. Now he's going to go to your job. So I think that fear of escalation makes people not seek help, or even what we were talking about, that fear of like, I don't want to ruin his life and call the police. But meanwhile, what happens if you don't? What happens if you don't call the police and then he continues and it gets worse and more scary? I think a pretty standard question that the police ask is like, what took you so long to call? Or now I know in some cases the police are frankly being judgmental and they lack training, and I'm with that. But they're also looking like, did he threaten you? Or were you not free to call the police? That you need to call. Though I recognize we're two white women talking about calling the police, but it can be difficult for some people to make that call for a variety of reasons. But I still am like, call. Restraining orders work. I think there's a lot of misconceptions around that too. Did you ever have to get a restraining order?
I never did. I really should have. I actually had to have the locks changed at my house a few times. He's like breaking in through windows. Oh my gosh. But you said something really powerful, which is that a lot of people are trying to like, well, I don't want to make him more mad. If I get this restraining order, then I don't know what he'll do. Like right now, he's just harmlessly stalking, and I'm used the monster I know right now. But if I set him off, he could beat me up again or show up in a more violent way or kill me.
That's a really real fear. I mean, I encourage people, honestly, to do risk assessments and danger assessments or work with coaches who hold those certifications. I have a certification in that, but I want people to really think about it. Restraining orders work. Now, people will always say they don't work. Or what are you going to do? Ball up the paper and throw it at him? It is proven that in 75% of cases, it reduces or removes stalking, or removes the post-separation violence, harm, stalking in 75% of cases. But we're dealing with the narcissistic population. And I'm not saying they all fit into that other 25%, but in cases that we're talking about with our clients and that we've experienced, I know that like we're probably dealing with more of that group, that restraining order is not going to make them stop. It make things worse. But the crazy part about the law is you still have to attempt to get one, because then you can get them on a breach. At least you show and prove that you're making an attempt. Though restraining orders are not that easy to get. People act like you can just walk into a police station, file one, and off you go. But it's much more complicated than that.
Money, they cost money, which is a barrier for some people, especially when that's part of the control is financial. Like, I don't even have any money. I don't know where to go. And now you want me to pay $300 to $700 for this restraining order that I don't have. But you're right. Like, even if it doesn't stop them, the initial restraining order, you can get them on the breach, right? You're reinforcing the boundary. You cannot contact me. You cannot contact me. And they'll eventually go to jail. And guess what? The stalking will stop then because they're removed and they don't have access to call you.
Make it hard as humanly possible. One of the things that I learned, and it's such a small tip and it's surprisingly simple, and it's not that it works with the abuser. This is more of a legal protection. You have to tell them that you want them to stop. You can't just block them. You need it in writing or provably so that you said, do not contact me. When you skip that step, the first question the police ask is, did you ask him to stop? But what makes that hard too, when we talk about trauma bonding even, is you may ask him to stop contacting you and then you called him a week later. And you get a restraining order when you're the one reaching out. This again speaks to the lack of training, was generally speaking in the system, of knowing that the victim can want someone to stop and terrified of someone to call them. It makes no sense, but it makes sense if you've been through it.
I agree. I think there just needs to be more education, awareness, and training on it because it's similar to Stockholm Syndrome. How do you name the captive? You can't.
You can't. I totally agree. But we often do that, right? It's the victim's fault. It's really wild how people blame the victim, blame the person who was victimized by being kidnapped or stalked or abused in some way. It's crazy that we don't focus it on the abuser. Now,
Yeah.
tell me what you think drives an abuser to stalk. What do you think is the motivator?
Control. This is my toy. You don't get to be done. I'm not done playing with you until I say that I'm done playing with you. Nobody else can have you. It's their ego. I think they're completely driven by their ego. And for you to decide that you're done is that, what is it? Oh my gosh. What's the word for when bruised ego that, they can't handle it. I would say mostly it's just control.
They feel like you are rejecting them, and they're losing this power and dominance over their victim. And you often see, this is why in post-separation, you see the abuse escalate. This is why the most commonly known fact about domestic violence is that when you leave is the most dangerous time. This is exactly an example of some of the behaviors that you're going to see after, and they're going to mask it as acts of love or missing you. And depending on where your head is at, some of that sounds true or feels true, or you want it so badly to be true. But at the end of the day, what they want is to maintain control. Sometimes they are trying to scare you, but I think that even in those cases, they're trying to scare you to just feel fear. Sometimes it's going to sort of scare you back into the relationship, which some can work. I've seen it work before.
It does work a lot. It takes women sometimes on average 7 times to leave. And it's usually because of that hoovering and that stalking and that fear tactic. But I think narcissism in itself is like, this is the external world that I'm playing out in my mind. Like, I want this to happen externally. And if that doesn't, I'm going to lose it. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that this plays out the way I want it to in my head, instead of controlling my internal emotions or feelings or rejection.
Yeah, they can't handle it at all. And what I have seen in my own experience and hear constantly from clients is that the abuser sees it as justified. Like they believe that they had no choice. So I know for me, I heard my own abuser say, "You lied and I had no choice. I had to prove that you lied." And he tracked me on Google. So he actually stole my work laptop, which was connected to my personal Gmail, which was connected to my phone. And you can actually log in. And I learned this from my abuser, that you can log in to Google somehow and go in and look at the map or the location. Then it'll tell you if the person was walking or driving. It makes all these assumptions. I mean, I don't understand all the technology behind it, but he actually believed that I was cheating. And it doesn't matter. I wasn't cheating. That's not the point. But I remember on a day that I had off, I went to a park and I was so distraught about my relationship falling apart. I was literally sitting in a park, eating a sub, talking on the phone with my sister. And he believed that because I had parked on some street, that I must have been in one of the houses. And he went to that street and started knocking on doors and showed them my picture. I was like, "Do you know her? Were you with her?" And asking people. It was absolutely insane. I did not think that was sweet or loving.
Right.
I thought that was absolutely terrifying. That was a little bit beyond when he first started doing more subtle.
Yeah.
Took it a bit too far there. That was unbelievably terrifying, the lengths he would go to. But my point is, he felt so justified. He had to prove that I was lying. And he still, to this day, would say he did prove that I was lying. My little footsteps on the map did not show me walking into a house. I knew exactly where I was. I walked past a bunch of houses, down a path, onto a bench, facing the water. I remember exactly the street where I was sitting and everything. But he is convinced, but it's justified. I lied, and the punishment is he has no choice but to stalk me.
Well, and I think the narcissism is just that detachment from reality. Their narrative is so squirmy. This is what I feel. Therefore, this is what is real. So their personality, their narrative will just flip flop, right? It might be this today, and then tomorrow it'll be this, because their reality is fluid. It's not real. And that's what makes them so mentally ill and dangerous, because they're not in touch with reality.
Yeah. And then I find we live in that reality sometimes too. And I think that kind of even speaks to this, like, maybe he loves me so much and he just can't let me go, instead of, no, girl, be afraid. This is a terrifying situation, because they see it as justified and it's not a big deal. Like, so what? I just wanted to see you. You blocked me. What choice did I have but to show up to your work? what choice did I have but call your mother 37 times, right? It's crazy.
Yeah. Heaven forbid you just move on, get, work on yourself, stay in your lane. That could be an option, but not in their mind.
Yeah.
It's an option.
Yeah. They don't even consider just letting go because they cannot accept the control part that's being removed from their purview. What do you think are more subtle signs that people are being stalked and interpret as kind of harmless? Some small things. You talked about, showing up or phone calls. Do you think that those are like some of the more subtle things? Are there any other subtle things that people miss?
I would say that kind of stuff, right? Like kind of just texting you and checking in a lot, phone calls. But it could be subtle, like changing their route home from work to go to the gas station by your house, or kind of showing up to restaurants or bars or places that you hang out, and just like the hopes that you guys might cross paths. Like those kind of would be more subtle ways of, or the social media stalking, just like looking at your profile and your story.
Mm-hmm. Those are really subtle. And the run-in, right? Like suddenly he's at your favorite bar when he knows you go there often with your friends, the bar that he always said was stupid, that he never wanted to go with you. And suddenly he's there, or he changes his route home. And it's like, what? I'm just driving home. I can't drive where I want, but it's like, you don't take this route. Those are much more subtle. And I think, accidentally running into your abusive ex that you've asked not to have contact with, subtly driving by and suddenly showing up in your world, or reconnecting with your friends, talking to your friends, talking to people about the breakup, or suddenly like positioning themselves in your life somehow. I had a client once whose abuser got a job at her job.
Yeah.
That's stalking to me. If it's an abusive situation, he does it on purpose.
Right. Because I was going to say you work in a public entity like a mall or a store or a grocery store, and then they're shopping there. But yeah, to go and get a job there is next level. That's not even subtle stalking. That's scary stalking.
Yeah. She was lucky in her case. Her employer understood the situation. It was a large enough company that he got hired, but it was a small enough company that they did not maintain his employment, which I think is amazing because you don't often see that kind of support for survivors. It's like, listen, you guys can work in the same place and it's not a big deal. You don't work in the same department.
Bring the drama here. And
yeah. And I get as a survivor, like wanting to keep it separate. You don't necessarily want to disclose what you're going through to your employer. So in her case, all the, stars aligned and she was able to actually bring that up. But it's great that they helped her. But some of these little like monitoring behaviors, I think that there's also this pattern of it starting before the relationship even ends, that you might be able to even realize that this could happen if the relationship ends, where they are you're in that type of relationship where they're checking your social media. I'm talking about when you're dating, right? Or making you give them your phone to go through it, checking up on you when you're together.
That's like having a Jeeps tracker in the car, knowing how much gas you put in, or like, well, how did you get to a quarter of a tank? Just that level of control where they're constantly, you're under a microscope, what you do, who you're hanging out with, your behaviors. That's so indicative that this man or woman will be stalking you afterwards.
Absolutely. This always sticks in my mind because it was one of the very first few clients that I had. She was required to document how many miles she drove. And if it was off by more than 1/2 of 1 mile, she had to explain where she went. You only live 5 miles from your job. And so if you actually just drove home, why does it say 6? Why? Explain it to me, Kat. Now, where'd you go? Who are you with? That type of behavior, which might seem overt, but when you're in it, it's like, your head's just not on straight when you're in these relationships. You don't realize.
Yeah, you're just confused and you get caught up when you're put on the defensive, especially if you're a conscientious person or like highly empathetic, where you're just trying to make it right, where you're like, just like, okay, I promise I wasn't doing anything. And you're just so focused on like proving that you are trustworthy or not out to hurt them or harm them, that you don't step back and be like, they're hurting me. I don't deserve to be treated this way.
Oh, it's so true. So tell me, if somebody thinks that they're being stalked or realizes that they absolutely are being stalked, what would you recommend that they do to kind of get ahead of it and start to help themselves.
I definitely would make sure you're telling loved ones. You want the people in your life to know. So like your family and friends, like I'm concerned about this person. You want to start taking different measures like blocking them, documenting. The first step, like you said, is please leave me alone. Ask them to leave you alone. So then from there on, everything that they're doing that's not leaving you alone, you're documenting that, you're getting your restraining order, you're reinforcing the restraining order every time that they break it. And you just take that till the full extent until they stop or they're made to stop.
That's really amazing advice. And I'm going to add something that I learned was to have a go bag ready in your car. And if you have kids, put a few things in there for them, even if it's just like a change of clothes for 2 days and just a few important documents, cash, whatever you need, whatever you would need if you were running for your life.
Yeah.
And that is important, right? I think that someone who's only been emotionally abusive, it's like, oh, he's not really going to hurt me. You do not know the version of him that has lost you, the version of him that has lost control. And that is a different person. That is a different monster. When you are escaping a relationship and they don't feel like they have that control, abuse is going to escalate. So don't downplay it. And it's not ridiculous to have a go bag, in your car or in the front hall closet as you run out the door. Also to really think about the external part of your house. If you can afford to put motion lights, motion cameras, not just a doorbell camera, right? Like in more places. I mean, you don't have to become Fort Knox, but to really have eyes around your house. You can also reverse park in your driveway instead of front face park so that if you did have to run, it's like you don't have to deal with reversing out. You can just go. There's a lot of little things, but I recommend that people really do like risk assessment and safety plan what might need to happen. And if you have little kids, what that might look like. How do you run out of the house with 2 kids, especially if they were sleeping or not? I've got a client with teenagers, and I think in some ways that can be harder because you have to explain. My kids were tiny. I didn't have to explain anything. I had run before. Going for a car ride is all you really need to say, but get ready. Plan out what it might look like if you need to run. And the restraining order thing, like get one if you can. And even if you're denied, attempt to get one. That'll still be on file, like I've attempted to get restraining orders multiple times and I'm doing my best to get this person to stop.
You're absolutely right, especially with like, oh, they've only ever emotionally abused me. Desperate people. Oh my gosh, you're right. It's a whole nother monster. Please don't think that it will never get to that. I like the motion lights and the extra security. My aunt has these sticks that she just sets up against her doorknob so that you can't like twist the doorknob. So that's the easy thing that you could pick up too if you can't afford the whole security system. And then I liked what you said about like the go bag and the documents. I actually once heard a video of a woman that said get a support sister where you have extra documents at their house, like your birth certificates, passports, extra money. So it's also in another place too. So not all your eggs are in one basket.
Yeah, actually incredible because you never know, right? Like your abuser could take your car or you don't have a car and you're fleeing. People live in all kinds of different places too. I always picture this like in the suburbs or in a city, but there are places where you don't really have access to public transportation or you can't flee. So it's really important to try to build up a support system to have somewhere you can go or keep documents or keep money, someone to communicate with. Like that's so important.
Maybe you're in a really shocking situation. You have a to-go bag in your car, in your house, and at your friend's house. You have multiple.
Yeah. Don't feel like that's outrageous or an overreaction. I think overreacting needs to happen more in these circumstances. It really does. We need to it's okay to be afraid. Let yourself be afraid. There's a great book called The Gift of Fear by Gavin DeBecker, and I recommend it to everyone. The concept of the book is that we have a gift of fear, and it is in our intuition. And when we feel it, don't slam it down. And people do it, but women in particular kind of slam that down. Like, I don't want to be too much. I don't want to get him in trouble. Like, but it's not stalking really, right? He just showed up a couple of times and we sort of downplay, but your intuition is screaming that this is important. Listen to yourself, listen to your gut. And if you're able to set any kind of boundaries when you are sensing that a person is starting to stalk you, do that, but safely. So what do you think people can kind of do to set some boundaries as they start to notice some added control or something that might start beginnings of feeling like being stalked?
Well, I think so. Say they're constantly like wanting to see your location, but like, you don't have access to my location because you're abusing it as a point of control and power. So I would start like taking some control back. Like, you're not gonna check my gas gauge. I'm gonna reset my trip, right? Like, and all of this is way easier said on the outside of abuse. I know when you're inside of an abusive relationship and someone big is leaning over you saying, you have to show me these things, it can feel like, I can't set that boundary. But we do have a lot more power than we think. And I think in the act of trying to set some of these boundaries, if they're getting more loud, angry, violent, that's who they are. And that really shows you like, oh, I'm not safe in this relationship. And the only way to protect myself is by exiting this relationship. So sometimes just like trying to start setting boundaries will show you if this is a place that you can stay.
That's very true. I've heard this many times before, but when you kind of start to say no or start to push back, if you notice their reactions are getting really out of control, it's like you're seeing the escalation. And even though that's scary, you're starting to see and connect with the fact that this is dangerous. And that can be a really helpful thing in getting you out, where you start to take what's happening to you seriously and stop downplaying the abuse like we often see victims and survivors do.
Yes, instead of managing them so that they don't act out or yell or act that way, it's like, don't manage them, protect yourself and see who they really are.
Yeah. Thank you so much for talking with me about this. And I know it's like a really terrifying topic, but we don't talk about it enough. I rarely see people really going into detail about like what this looks like and how to help yourself, the safety plan, and get yourself out as safely as possible. So tell us, where can people find?
Yeah, you can find me on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook as Katherine Kleis. My website is standcoaching.com. So Stand Coaching, Katherine Kleis. Thank you for inviting me to talk on this and kind of help raise awareness on this topic.
Yeah, my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Stronger than before.
What an amazing episode. I'm so happy to have had Kat Kleis on this show talking about stalking. And if you're experiencing something like this, I really recommend working with someone to safety plan. I'm certified in danger assessment and I work as a coach. And you can contact me at strongerthanbefore.ca. You can also call a domestic violence hotline and safety plan with one of their resource workers. I also invite you to join my Trauma Bond recovery course if you are feeling attached and dependent on your abuser, or you're struggling with a lot of those feelings that make you think that some of these stalking behaviors are not so bad. Join the Trauma Bond recovery course and start to break free and rebuild and feel self-love so that you can feel safe again.